All right, so when we talk about getting to net zero, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably a ton of new tech, right? Solar panels, wind turbines. But what if that's only part of the puzzle? We're going to dive into a really fascinating study today that kind of flips that whole idea on its head and rethinks how we even plan for a carbon-neutral future. Let's get into it.
It really all comes down to one big question. Are we going to try and invent our way out of the climate crisis with all sorts of expensive, high-tech fixes? Or do we need to fundamentally change how our society uses energy in the first place? Well, this new approach we're looking at today, it tackles that question head-on.
So here's what's on deck. First, we'll talk about this gap, this disconnect between all the good ideas and what actually becomes policy. Then, we'll get into how this research just totally flipped the script by letting policymakers take the lead. We're going to explore the 4 different futures they came up with, check out the pretty shocking results from the energy models, and then, and this is super important, we'll see what everyday people had to say about it.
Okay, first things first. Let's really nail down the problem this research was trying to fix. And it's a big one. This massive gap between what the experts say we should be doing and what actually happens in the real world. For ages we've had studies showing that one of the best ways to hit our climate goals is just to, use less energy, reduce our demand. But for some reason, those ideas just don't seem to make it into actual policy. Instead, what do we see? A big focus on the supply side. Building more wind farms, more solar panels, and that's all great, but it often leads to these super expensive, tech-heavy solutions.
Right, so let's make sure we're all on the same page with this term, energy demand. It's not just about remembering to switch off the lights when you leave a room. Think bigger. It's the grand total of all the energy we use to run our entire society, from heating our homes and driving our cars to powering all of our industries. So when we talk about reducing demand, we're talking about being smarter, using less energy to get the same results, or maybe even better ones. It's about tackling the problem right at the source.
And this is where the study gets really clever. This is its big idea. Because instead of just writing another academic paper that, let's be honest, probably would have just sat on a shelf gathering dust, they did something different. They completely changed who was in the driver's seat. This is absolutely the key right here. Instead of having academics dream up these perfect theoretical futures and just hand them over, this project actually invited the policymakers themselves to the table. We're talking about the people who write the laws, who actually shape the country. They were asked to help build these future scenarios from scratch. And that makes all the difference, right? Because now the results are grounded in what's actually possible politically and what these policymakers are really worried about.
And this wasn't just a one-off chat. It was a whole 5-step process. They started by gathering all the evidence they could on big societal trends. Then they got policymakers and other experts together in workshops to figure out, okay, what are the biggest things that could change our future? From there, they actually wrote out stories, narratives for these possible futures. Then they ran the numbers, modeling the energy side of things. And finally, and this part is so crucial, they took it all of the public to get their take.
So, what came out of all this? Well, they ended up with 4 really detailed, really different visions of what the UK could look like by 2050. And remember, all of them are designed to hit that net zero target.
Okay, check this out. The way they organize these 4 futures is super smart. They put them on a grid with 2 big what-ifs as the axes. Running side to side, you've got social cohesion, basically how much we trust each other and our institutions, from low to high. And then going up and down, you've got economic growth and technology, again, from low to high. This setup gives us 4 totally different quadrants, 4 possible worlds we could end up in.
Let's start with the 2 high-growth futures up top. First, on the top left, you have the atomized society. Imagine a world that's all about high-tech gadgets and buying lots of stuff, but it's also a world with huge inequality. Individual freedom is king, which sounds good, but it means if you can afford it, you've got a super smart home while lots of other people have lost their jobs to automation. Now contrast that with the metropolitan society over on the top right. Here, technology is used for the good of everyone. We're talking AI running super efficient public transport, smart grids that cut energy waste, and automation that actually frees people up to do more creative and community-oriented things.
All right, now let's drop down to the 2 lower growth worlds. Over on the bottom right, we've got the slow lane society. In this future, the focus isn't on endless growth, it's on well-being. People care more about things that last, things they can repair. You see community tool libraries and repair cafes everywhere. It's a different vibe. But then, look at the bottom left, the self-preservation society. This is a pretty bleak picture. It's low growth and low trust.
Society is fragmented, things are breaking down, and people are just trying to get by with old, inefficient tech because that's all there is.
Okay, so now we have these 4 really rich, detailed futures, right? All designed by policymakers. The big question is, what happens when you feed these scenarios into a powerful energy system model? Well, what the computer spit out was not what you'd expect.
This is the first bombshell. Take a look. Even in the worlds that were all about high growth and fancy tech, like that atomized society, the total amount of energy we'd use still went down by 2050. That's huge. It suggests that as soon as you start thinking about how we use energy, about the demand side, you start seeing reductions almost automatically. The drop was somewhere between 18 and 45% across all 4 possible futures.
45%. Let that sink in for a second. That was the biggest drop they saw, and it happened in that slow-lane society. A future that prioritizes community and well-being over just stuff ends up cutting its energy needs almost in half. That is just a staggering number.
But hold on, it's not just about using less energy or cutting emissions. It's also about the money. It has a huge impact on how much the whole system costs. And honestly, this is where it gets really interesting.
Just look at these numbers. It's night and day. To get to net zero in that high-tech, atomized society, the cost of our energy system every year would go up by 136%. 136! Now look at the slow-lane society, the one focused on lower demand. The cost increase there? Just 24%. That means the high-tech, high-growth future is literally more than 100% more expensive. Wow, if you ever needed an argument for focusing on demand, this is it.
So the models and the numbers paint a really clear picture about the economics, but what about people? What about us? The final, absolutely critical step in all this was taking these 4 futures to the public and basically asking, hey, would you actually want to live in any of these worlds? And what they heard back was super insightful. It didn't matter which future they were talking about, a few things kept coming up again and again. People demanded that the transition has to be fair. You can't leave people behind. They wanted real investment in helping people learn new skills for green jobs. They also said, hey, this can't just be on us as individuals. Businesses need to make big changes too. And maybe most importantly, they wanted a voice. They wanted to be part of the decision-making.
This quote right here just cuts right to the chase. Over and over, people talked about this fear, this worry that the shift to net zero would slam people with less money or who live in certain areas way harder than others. So this idea of fairness and equity, it wasn't just some nice-to-have bonus. For them, it was a deal breaker. Without it, no plan was going to fly.
And another huge takeaway, people just don't trust top-down solutions. It didn't matter which scenario it was. They were deeply skeptical of the idea of the government just handing down a plan from on high. They want to be asked. They want to be part of a process that respects their local community.
So if you take one thing away from this whole project, let it be this. How we do this is just as important as what we do. The process itself is everything. That old way of doing things, where a bunch of experts cook up a plan and the government just forces it on everyone, that's just not going to work. If we want to build a future that people can actually get behind, it has to be collaborative. People have to be involved from day one.
And that really is the biggest gift of this research. It's not just an interesting academic idea. By bringing everyone to the table, the policymakers, the data experts, and the public, it gives us a practical blueprint, a way to plan for a net zero future that's not only cheaper and less risky, but that people actually want. It has a real democratic stamp of approval. So I'll leave you with this question. This whole study was about putting policymakers in a room to design the future. But what if it were you? What if we were in that room? What would you choose? What would you be willing to give up? What kind of future would you build?